The Montana class is often touted as the successor to the Iowa class. Whilst this might have been the case in terms of when the hulls would have been laid down, the two designs actually started life at the same time. After the South Dakota class had been ordered and the displacement escalator clause of the London Naval Treaty invoked, alongside the gun caliber clause that had previously been invoked, allowing the US Navy to install 16-inch weapons on the North Carolinas and South Dakotas, the US Navy commissioned a series of battleship design studies in 1938 to look at what they could get with the new 45,000-ton displacement limit. There were two major choices to make: firepower and speed. From this, two streams of designs evolved. The fast battleship, that would eventually go on to become the Iowa, wherein firepower and improved armour was sacrificed in exchange for speed, and the slow battleship studies, which used displacement to ramp up firepower and protection, whilst retaining the 27 to 28 knot speed of the previous two generations of American battleships. With the fast battleship prioritised, the slower vessel developed at a more leisurely pace. With the speed decided, the next question was firepower, at least for the minute. It seemed natural to want to uprate the guns, but by 1939 the designs had rather begun to breed, with the BB-65 having variants running from A through J, including 6 different versions of Design C. The 18-inch armed variant was discarded fairly quickly at this point, as the designers felt that with the speed and protection needed, they could only get a somewhat inadequate 6 guns in 3 twin turrets installed. But the remaining weapons choices varied almost as much as the armour. Considered protection ran from 12 to 15.5 inches, and firepower options included 16-inch 50 guns, a conceptual 16-inch 56 caliber weapon, and even 14-inch 50 caliber weapons, this last on BB-65J in 3 triple turrets, with the saved weight going into protection. The layout of the main battery also varied considerably, including twin, triple, and quadruple turrets, and mixed types of turrets, with 2 quads and a triple for 11 guns popping up a couple of times, as did a King George V-like 2 quads and a twin. Secondary armament was also heavily varied, with the traditional 5-inch 38 being considered alongside a concept for a 5.4-inch gun, another concept for a 6-inch 47 caliber weapon, and a new 5-inch gun at 54 caliber length. But with all of these variants on gunpowder, protection was still an issue. On 45,000 tons, better protection than an Iowa meant accepting the same firepower, whilst greater firepower was leaving the ship no better protected than its faster relative. A series of sketch designs at the end of 1939 explored a number of variants but narrowed down the options slightly, and these used the theme of a ship protected as the Iowa class were, but with 12 16-inch guns, some in 4 triple and others in 3 quad turrets, with a secondary battery that was normally 20 guns in 10 twin turrets, playing around with the specific secondary gun in different iterations. The outbreak of World War II, however, saw that the treaties had been well and truly abandoned, and so displacement was allowed to increase, and a plan for new wider locks on the Panama Canal meant that the previous width restriction of 108 feet on the beam was also dropped. This led to a spate of new designs in early 1940, with displacements ranging from 51,000 to 80,000 tons. Armament at this point varied very little, but protection and speed now began to change radically, with BB-65-8C coming in with a belt just over 15 inches thick, a 6.2-inch deck, and a 33-knot top speed. This was a slight step down from BB-65Y3, which had dropped some of the protection to try and aim for over 34 knots of speed on about 74,000 tons. The summer months saw even more variations, with another 13 designs submitted. Although speed was still considered, this time it was armour that began to climb, even at the expense of losing one of the triple turrets. In this period, BB-65-9 and BB-65-10 got up to a 16.2-inch thick armour belt, whilst only carrying 9 guns, whilst the new BB-65-8 went for a full main battery of 12 guns on a hull 1,050 feet long and 125 feet wide in order to try for 33 knots on a hull that was expected to hit 82,000 tons displacement on trials. But, as it turned out, BB-65 and BB-66 were laid down as Iowa-class ships. These were the two that would never be completed, and so as 1940 rolled into 1941, the new BB-67 designs were prepared. This time, there was a vaguely sane reduction in the number of options to only 4, all of which were broadly similar and differed only in slight details. The Montana's most likely final form, then, was thus likely to be BB-67-4, carrying 12 guns in 4 triple turrets, a pair superfiring forward and another pair aft, carrying the same 16-inch 50 caliber gun as on the Iowas. Secondary battery consisted of 20 twin 5-inch 54 caliber turrets, 5 per side, and using the 115 to 118 foot beam to stagger and superfire the secondary battery as opposed to being all in line as on many other warships. As planned, the ship would carry up to 40 of the 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns alongside over 50 20mm Oerlikons, although if the ships had been completed, this number would almost certainly have risen substantially. 172,000 shaft horsepower would give the ship a speed of 28 knots on 4 screws, driving a hull that would displace just over 60,000 tons standard and just over 70,000 tons loaded. An inclined armour belt 16.1 inches thick and placed on the outside of the ship, as opposed to the internal belts on the South Dakota and Iowa, along with a 5.8-inch thick main armoured deck, gave a calculated immune zone against its own guns of 18,000 to 32,000 yards. Interestingly, the total weight of the ship's armour alone amounted to about the same as the entire standard displacement for the US Navy's first dreadnought battleships, the South Carolina class. The 5 ships ordered would have been named Montana, Ohio, Maine, New Hampshire, and Louisiana, all to be built on the US East Coast, which probably would have meant sailing to the Pacific with the British Pacific Fleet if they'd been completed. Now, why is that, you ask? Well, although notionally ordered in 1940, but actually before the final design had even been settled, as with the Alaskas, even the mighty US industrial machine was beginning to reach its limits, and industrial bottlenecks followed by a steel shortage prevented their keels from being laid down in 1941 or 1942. And this shortage would also see the cancellation of the expanded Panama Canal lock scheme, meaning that if built, the ships would have had to transition across the Atlantic and through the Indian Ocean to get to the Pacific. A shift towards churning out more and more Essex-class would then see the ships cancelled completely in July 1943, leaving poor old Montana as the only US state at the time to have managed to go through the entire battleship era without getting a ship named after it, having missed out previously when the 1920s South Dakota class was cancelled. However, it should not be assumed that the statistics we just mentioned are necessarily what the final design of the ship would have been. The Bureau of Ships was updating the design constantly whilst implementation was on hold, with some thought given to reducing the side armour back to Iowa-like levels in exchange for increasing the deck protection to a combined thickness of 10.4 inches. With the last known formal design sketches in mid-1942 looking at reducing the ship's speed by a knot, lengthening the ship, and drastically reducing the 5-inch armament in exchange for even more 40mm and 20mm weapons, reflecting the issues that experienced by the US Navy in the first part of the Pacific campaign with their heavy anti-aircraft batteries. So exactly what the Montanas would have looked like had they ever been built still remains a little bit of a mystery.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.